And it's our pleasure to welcome in a former Notre Dame offensive lineman and now the host of the Gojo Show, part of the DraftKings family, like we are as well. It is Mike Golic Jr. And Mike, before we get to your alma mater, let's stick with what we saw last night on Monday Night Football. The early game goes very in hand to the Buffalo Bills. I mean, who would take the 10? Me, with Tennessee. When you look at that Buffalo team, their odds are flying up the board as low as, 5-2 in some spots. What can you pick apart, if anything, Mike, about this Buffalo team through two games?
I mean, maybe they're not as healthy as you'd like them to be right now. Josh Allen put a couple of weird balls in the dirt last night. And so maybe if you were someone still weirdly holding on to Josh Allen regressing, there's really nothing, man. Like it's going to be one of those things where it's just a matter of, do you trust the team with the experience of Kansas City, who's already had to make changes in the way they approach offense, to maybe be able to best them? Because when you look at Buffalo right now, they've been doing all of this without Tre'Davious White in the secondary. You look at on offense, no Gabe Davis last night. So they were able to do that with everyone and their mom basically knowing, hey, we're just going to throw it to Stephon Diggs a bunch of times and make this thing happen. And so this is a unit and a team that went out and addressed needs this offseason. The Von Miller signing has already looked like it's paying dividends, and it should be like this for most of the year for Buffalo. Miami will be an interesting matchup just because of how quick they can score and how fast that team is and what a unique threat that they pose. But Buffalo's come out in a portion of the season that normally teams treat like an extended preseason, and they've looked like they're already playing November and December football.
Mike, it's interesting because it's so easy to overreact, but it's such early in the NFL season. Tell me two teams, one that you feel like has gotten off to a slow start, but you aren't worried because you think when this is all said and done, there'll be a top 3 seed in the AFC or NFC. And who's a team that you are really disappointed in, who has gotten off to a slow start and you don't think you see the signs that are going to create change as the season goes?
Yeah, I think first on the top end, the team that I saw, especially after week 1, that people freaked out about, and in light of what we saw from the Vikings last night, I feel even better about. I think the Green Bay Packers are going to be just fine. I know they stepped back up and looked more like themselves against Chicago in week 2, but that's a team that finally got Elton Jenkins back along that offensive line. When Alan Lazard's able to get out there, and that receiving core that we know, full of young guys, Romeo Doubs and company, are going to get more time under task as the season goes along. Rushing attack and defense are going to be able to buoy them. I think they're still going to win the NFC North and be a team that's a huge factor in the NFC side of the playoffs. The other one that's been the massive disappointment, looking at the Colts, man. I mean, left tackle still clearly a product for them. Had a ton of issues with the other Josh Allen in the pass rush for the Jacksonville Jaguars last weekend. But you look right now on the back end of that defense, they can't cover anybody and no one's getting open. I know that they had their 2 best receivers unavailable for that game in Michael Pittman and their draft pick from this year. But on defense, whether it's man or zone, 28th in QBR allowed versus when showing man defense, 28th in QBR allowed against zone defense. This is just a back end that hasn't been able to hold up relative to what they've seen in the front 4. And if Jacksonville is going to go out and handily dominate you like this, I have questions about if these are things long-term we have to worry about, because Matt Ryan's not going to get more dynamic at quarterback. He's not going to be able to bail you out of some of the pressure that seems to be coming his way more than we expected. And that's a team that at the beginning of the year I picked to win the AFC South, and am looking wronger and wronger by the day.
And it's interesting because that was going to be my follow-up. That division, I mean, not only is Indianapolis looking like who knows, so is Tennessee. Houston's been extremely competitive. They haven't found a way to win a game. I still don't know how they lost the Denver game. But Jacksonville actually looks like the team, if you're buying stock, that has the most upside. So as the futures market has kind of reset through 2 weeks, where's the value, you think, in who's going to win the AFC South?
Yeah, listen, I think there's a ton of value because what Jacksonville's doing, it isn't some mirage, right? When you look at what's gone on, this is what we all expected when they would have a competent adult in the room and Doug Peterson as their head coach. Trevor Lawrence has looked incredible so far. They've gotten back to doing the things that he did in college. And man, when you get Trevor Lawrence on the run, I've seen few players with the ability to roll left away from their throwing arm and fire rockets down the field the way he has. The connection with Zay Jones and Christian Kirk has paid dividends for them so far. And James Robinson back in healthy in that rushing attack definitely makes a difference. But guys, on defense, Josh Allen, who I just mentioned, seems to be taking that next step. He was supposed to be the Josh Allen that you could bank more of your future on when he was coming out not too long after Josh Allen, the quarterback in the draft. It may have taken a little longer than expected, but when you couple that with Travon Walker and what he's done, their top overall pick on the defensive side, it's got the makings of a fast unit that came up and gave that Colts receiving core a lot of problems. They'll face better groups, but not really in this division, especially with the receiving changes that Tennessee made.
Yeah, I don't know how Devin Lloyd, who I had rated as one of the top 10 defenders in this draft, dropped to them. He's already got 11 tackles, 3 passes defense, and an interception through 2 games.
It really is remarkable. And, man, if you watch Utah in college this year, the first couple of games, part of that Florida loss was I think they missed the leadership of Devin Lloyd. So you're absolutely right. They've amassed kind of like what we've seen become trendy around the NFL, guys that can move around, do so many things, play a little bit of positionless football, and really wreak havoc up front on a Colts offensive line that maybe, myself included, we were operating on a bit of dated software with. But Jacksonville has all of the same advantages that they had last year, what we thought about this roster. Young, talented in a lot of key right places, right? Pass rusher, quarterback, receiver that we've talked about. And now you've got a coach who's starting to put it together and to put them in a position to succeed. And it's really exciting to watch because for so many of us that saw Trevor play on Saturdays, you wanted to see that talent be given a chance. You know, so many quarterbacks in the NFL, so many players in the NFL are crushed by system and fit regardless of talent. And there was a worry he was going to be one of those guys. I'm a lot less worried about that based on the opportunities we've seen for him so far.
We're chatting with Mike Golic Jr. Check out the Gojo Show, part of the DraftKings family. Also, catch him on Saturdays calling college football. And I want to get to a team that you called this past weekend before we jump to your alma mater, Mike, which is Washington. Both Sean and I very impressed through 3 games. Kalen DeBoer, wherever he goes, seems to work magic. And Michael Penix is back to the Indiana Michael Penix we saw a couple years ago. Do you think this Washington team has the goods to make it to Las Vegas in early December?
Yeah, I absolutely think so. I mean, I know a lot of us, myself included, are still very high on Utah. I got a chance to see them week 1, and that was a team that, while they lost in the swamp to a talented Florida team, still got a lot of what they wanted and still has an experienced offense and a defense that's getting better as the weeks go along. They're pretty, formidable on that side of the ball, an identity that's been long built up there around that head coach. But for Washington, they're interesting to me because right now it's USC's Pac-12 based on the way that we look at this from the outside. They came in and kicked open that door earlier than expected. But as far as how you go about beating that USC team, the 2 schools of thought are, 1, Utah, you can go ball control and play defense. But with Washington, I love the thought of them going toe-to-toe because it's not the same spread offense we see from Lincoln Riley. Kalen DeBoer runs much more of an NFL system, shifts, motions, and a lot of personnel changes. And right now, he's got the group to do it. No sacks in that last game against Michigan State, a front that had produced a lot of havoc behind the line of scrimmage in the prior weeks. I think that's a great sign for a Washington whose offensive line is only going to get healthier when they get Jackson Kirkland back and really has a chance to keep being this explosive. It's not hype. It's real on their passing offense.
And it's interesting because, Mike, I don't think they get Southern Cal or Utah during the regular season. So they could make it to the Pac-12 title game without having to encounter either.
Yeah, no divisions as well. Mike, before we let you run, and we're leaving you a minute, and I know you could go for days. Your alma mater, let's look at it glass half full. They beat Cal. How do they turn it around and get to 8-9 wins this year?
It starts with what really came to light against Cal. The front 4 on defense got a ton of pressure without having to bring extra bodies. And then the offensive line finally started to look familiar. Notre Dame went to a ground-based attack because your backup quarterback was struggling. And that makes it a fascinating matchup. I know North Carolina, Notre Dame started as a pick'em this week. Notre Dame's now getting 2 points on the road against a Carolina team that has trouble up front on both sides of the ball. Could be interesting to see if Notre Dame leans all the way in to that ball control, smash them up mentality that they tried to bring to Columbus for the Ohio State game against an opponent that's going to provide much less resistance on the defensive side.
You can follow him on Twitter at Mike Golic Jr., the Gojo Podcast. And Mike, real quick, what game you calling this weekend?
I'm going to be in Norman, Oklahoma. The Sooners undefeated hosting Kansas State, who's given them some trouble in recent years, so should be a fun one.
Find out where Martinez is. That can't be him now. I saw against Tulane.
There he is, Mike Golic Jr. Great insight as always. Check out the Gojo Show. It is VSiN Primetime.
Visit VSiN.com to get current odds, listen for free, find showtimes, and download VSiN sports betting podcasts.